Yeah, yeah. So Representative Gunberg wanted us to kind of speak a little bit, and just so everybody kind of knows my background, I'm the CEO for Matanuska Telephone Association. I've been involved in the telecom industry for a long time, since back about 1984. Actually involved in providing service in a lot of different sized communities, everything from like Anchorage down to little rural communities like Little Diomede. So I've got a lot of experience kind of in terms of just the dynamics and challenges of trying to provide service in a lot of different areas. It's been a really interesting forum. There's been a lot of interesting discussion. I wanted to maybe just kind of spend some time kind of doing a little bit of a state of the state type discussion and touch on some of these subjects that have been brought up. There's been a lot of discussion about fiber, and I would agree, fiber is really kind of the gold standard. That's really what I think everybody would love to have out there. It does take time to build. It's not something that you do real quick. It's not something that, you can actually just engineer and roll out there in a very short period of time. There's actually a lot of different right-of-way issues that you end up having to deal with, and sometimes the right-of-ways and permitting can take years actually to kind of work your way through. So it does kind of tend to be a challenge up here. There was a commentary I heard, I think, about middle mile, and I thought there was a good explanation about what middle mile is versus last mile. Middle mile is what gets the internet up here into the communities, and there's the last mile side, which is really that distribution that kind of gets it out into the individual customers that need it. Middle mile is a challenge in Alaska. We have to actually go down to Seattle, Washington to bring the internet into Alaska, because the nearest internet peering point is Seattle. So effectively, what everybody that provides internet service in Alaska, what we have to do is we have to go buy transport capacity down there and bring that up. And it's not cheap, because it's 2,000 miles of transport. So like, for example, in MTA's case, just to provide the internet that we're providing in the service area that we have, we spend a little over $4 million a year in transport to the lower 48 for that capacity. If I was down in the lower 48, that same transport probably would cost me $40,000. So there's a huge difference, and it does have a big impact across the state. And when you start looking across the state at some of the bush locations, that's a real challenge that really Alaska has in terms of being able to offer broadband. These communities that are isolated, don't have a road system connecting them, it literally costs hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to get transport out there to try to serve those particular locations. And that's really one of the big problems that we have in Alaska that everybody struggles with. When we talk about Fairbanks, Fairbanks really doesn't have a middle mile problem. There's lots of transport that comes into Fairbanks that provides capacity. It's really that distribution problem that I think people have been talking about here. How do you get that service out there to those people that need it, that don't have it right now? ACS has got some plans here in terms of rolling out essentially what Jeremy's been talking about here in terms of a fixed wireless product. Hopefully maybe down the road that'll evolve into something more like fiber, but certainly, as he's indicating, there's a lot of opportunity there that fixed wireless can provide in terms of fast internet that's really improving a lot with technology over time. MTA, we serve a big area. The area that we serve is 10,000 square miles. If you actually compared it to a state, it's about the size of the state of Maryland. So we're in the process of building out internet basically to the state of Maryland in terms of the area that we are trying to serve. And in MTA's case, we're spending probably about $250 million over the next 10 years on fiber deployment. And that's still not going to actually get fiber to everybody. The engineers in our company have told me that really to get fiber to the home to everybody in the MTA service area probably would take 25 years and almost $500 million. So it's an expensive undertaking given the size of the geography that we're trying to serve. There was some discussion about the RCA and kind of the RCA's role in this whole process. And I think Seth pointed out something that was in that memo that the RCA put out. Their statutes and regulations go back into 1990. And that's kind of the world that they operate in, because their statutes really control who and what they are. So that's really where they're at. They're kind of back still in that old telephony voice world that existed. I've gone to a lot of the public meetings that the RCA's had where they've talked about kind of broadband, and I've heard one of the commissioners saying, I don't really understand why companies would be putting out fiber versus copper. So that kind of gives you a sense of the level of understanding that they have right now. So they're probably not what I would call to be maybe the best advocate for how to deal with broadband problems. I think some of the discussion today that's come out about really focusing kind of down at the community level makes a lot of sense. It's hard to kind of plan this thing and organize it from a statewide level where you're kind of taking into account all the different issues and all the different problems that individual communities have, because everybody's different. What Fairbanks needs is probably going to be different than what Shishmaref needs, or Little Diomede Island or the Pribilofs. They're all kind of unique. They all have kind of different problems, and really organizing things kind of along that community line does make some sense. There was also some discussion about the Alaska plan. Something that I think people ought to know about that is that with the FCC reforms that were happening, that were going on over the last, say, 5 years, all the support that the federal government was providing to us was going away. It was essentially disappearing. That 1.3 million that Seth referred to, if we hadn't done anything, it was going to go to zero. And there's probably a lot of communities in this state that were going to be facing a discontinuance of service, not a discussion about can we get broadband, but whether or not even basic phone service was going to be continued. And the problem is because, the FCC doesn't understand Alaska. We're different. We're a big geographic area. We don't look like the lower 48. We don't have roads to every single community. It's not something that they relate to. They're in that beltway within Washington, D.C. They don't understand us. And so that was really the purpose of the Alaska plan. It was to kind of carve us out of what the FCC was doing, prevent damage from being done to our communities. But it's not new money. I mean, it's money that the state was receiving already. And without it, basic services wouldn't continue. As I mentioned, I've been involved in providing service in some of these little rural communities like Little Diomede Island. And I remember looking at the financials for these places. There's not enough end user revenue coming in to pay for the depreciation expense on the plant. So without all that support coming in, there's no phone service. You're basically back to where we were 30, 40 years ago when a lot of these villages had one phone in each community, and everybody lined up at that phone if they wanted to make a phone call, and it was very expensive. And we certainly never want to go back to that. So that was one of the things that obviously we're trying to prevent. I think in ACS's case, the money they have isn't new money for them either. I mean, it's money that's frozen from stuff that they were getting, I think, back in 2011. And that's frankly, I think, one of the big challenges we face. We have a infrastructure gap in this state. And we don't have any new money coming in to fund it. We have some existing money, which is there basically to keep the lights on. But we do need some new money. I mean, we need something to come in here and I think help us to bridge some of those gaps where it just hasn't been economic to provide infrastructure. Some of the discussions that I've had kind of with state government have been actually along the lines of something I think Gary Newman mentioned, which is some of the infrastructure money that might be possible in the future that are being talked about, and whether or not we have a good cohesive policy to go forward to lobby for some of that, because I think there's a really good opportunity, even from a state budget standpoint, if we can get some of that infrastructure money coming into the state. I think there's opportunities to use that to save the state money, actually to help with this whole budget problem we have. Just looking at the state school district budgets, if you take all of them to combine, all the different school districts, it's $3.5 billion. $2 billion of it is non-instructional. So it's basically their overhead. And I wonder if you had a really good broadband infrastructure out there, maybe you could save 10% of that, $200 million a year. So I could see a value proposition, $1 billion investment and you save $200 million a year. That makes good business sense. And I think on the federal side, I think there's similar savings that could be achieved. So I think there's an argument there that we can use to bring new money into the state to help solve this problem. And I think it's something definitely from a strategy standpoint we need to talk about. There's a lot of things kind of floating around out there, obviously. There's a lot of different pieces and parts that are happening. And I think, when I listen to a lot of the people and I've read a lot of the comments that were on the RCA's website about frustrations with service, I understand that. I've got a cabin down on the Kenai Peninsula, out kind of in a rural area. I got ACS phone service. I can't get internet. So I'm in the same boat, actually. And I'm waiting, just like you are, for some upgrades that they have planned for the future so I can actually get that. So I can sympathize quite a bit with the folks in this room about that. But I wanted to see if anybody had any particular questions or anything that they wanted to ask me while I'm here. Yeah.
What do you see the impact of the building law when it's finished?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Representative Guttenberg's question was this quintillion network that's being built that's across the Arctic, and it's this big, huge project that's coming into places like Nome and Kotzebue and stuff. They actually just finished it. They just turned it on, I think, yesterday is where it finally officially went live. And so that obviously is taking these communities off of having to be fed by satellite to now where they have very robust fiber coming into them. And I think it will have a tremendous impact. I think that it'll take time though, because a lot of these communities, they've been so dependent on satellite, which is essentially like drinking water through a very narrow straw. And now you've got a fire hose coming in. And so you have to, from a community standpoint, adapt to that. There's infrastructure that you had deployed that was really good for that straw type service you were getting. And it takes time to change that infrastructure to take advantage of that new bandwidth that's coming in. But I think eventually it will transform things.
When it's done.
Mm-hmm.
the streets of Tokyo and London,
Right.
what effect will that have?
I mean, hopefully it's going to have really good, I think, effects. Obviously, they have a fiber that comes down the haul road through Fairbanks, and connecting in with that additional fiber now that comes south, you can have Fairbanks potentially be a nice hub for a lot of that Asia to Pacific traffic, that will also dump off, possibly down through Alaska, down through Fairbanks. It's one of those things where I think you look for those opportunities and say, how can I take advantage of this new paradigm that's there?
Who's doing that now?
Quintillion, it's all.
Who's doing that piece
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, one of the things I do, like in the MTA area, yeah, Jeff Yanni, Alaska. What I do, like in the MTA area, one of the things that I always encourage our people to do is think long term. I always describe the things that we're doing, like with the fiber optics that we're putting out, like we're landscape architects. And we're building fiber out into these communities, and we probably can't even imagine what that fiber is going to do 30 years from now. But there are going to be creative minds that will. And so what we need to do is make sure we help the communities understand the capabilities that we are deploying, so that hopefully creative minds will start thinking about new ways that they can try to utilize that in terms of economic development for those communities. And it's something where, obviously, with that type of broadband connectivity, you're not so isolated anymore. I mean, you're basically connected with the world. It does open up other potentially international opportunities as well. Yep, it's a good important part of it. Yes, sir.
So the story I hear is that your co-op ran fiber up to Roosevelt, whatever that meant.
Right.
And so that's part of your plan to disperse fiber to your customers, or is that basically a private fiber line?
Well, right now, we're building fiber that's going north from the northern edge of our exchange, which is kind of the Claire Anderson area, up into Fairbanks. And we bought a fiber network from Golden Valley a couple years ago, so we're tying into that, which gives us connectivity, Fairbanks all the way down through Anchorage. Gives us that middle mile backbone, which then potentially creates possibilities for other things down the road.
That way, when I called last connect to Golden Valley number now because last connect is part of your.
Well, they're part of our organization, but they're still pretty independent. I mean, you can still call Alaska Connect directly, and really operates pretty much the same as they always did. Yeah.
So will MTA be offering services here in Fairbanks area?
Well, we are kind of through Alaska Connect right now already. I mean, primarily focused in the business market. We're looking at different ideas. I mean, one of the issues obviously is building out an infrastructure into a lot of those rural areas. It's a lot of money. How many hundreds of millions of dollars maybe would it cost? I don't know. We don't get any subsidies to go do that. ACS is, and ACS is planning on building, so it becomes more difficult in that type of scenario.
For competition?
Well, when you're building into it and it's a small, sparsely populated market, how much market are you going to end up keeping? I mean, most of the examples we saw today, it's kind of, there's no competition out there. You're the only game in town, so I'm going to get 70, 80% penetration. It's a lot easier to make a business model work. And if you get like a VTOP grant too to help pay for that infrastructure, that obviously takes the monetary risk way down. If I had grant monies, sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Michael, I wondered, and I'll ask the same question of my board people. If there was a viable group of people who wanted to form a cooperative just to be able to distribute fiber in the Fairbanks, North Dakota area, as part of the cooperative principle, this co-op stuff with other co-ops, concern for community. Do you think that your board, and I would ask the same thing, my board would be willing to facilitate helping them and say providing equities or whatever, so that they in turn can go out and develop a business plan and potentially borrow from US.
Yeah, I think it really gets down to the business plan, right? I think that was a comment that was heard today, is that, it's got to pencil out. And even though we're a co-op, the money that we work with, it's not my money, it's the member owner's money, it's the margins they provided that we're retaining to reinvest in the network or what we can borrow, so eventually I have to be able to repay that. So that ultimately becomes the big question, is there enough money there to allow me to repay that or not? And that's really the target that we all have to work on.
But it's not out of.
No, it's not outreach, it's something to pencil out.
So one of the things you keep talking about is the cost of building out, particularly rural Alaska. The numbers you're throwing around have got to be fiber numbers. Clearly, it's a lot cheaper to do that if you're using microwave rather than technology.
Yeah, it's some of it's fiber, some of it is microwave, which is still expensive. I mean, when you really kind of look at across the board, across the whole state, hybrid fiber microwave network that's redundant, in terms of rings, I mean, it's still really going to cost you anywhere from $1.4 to $1.9 billion to really put all that infrastructure in place. It's not a cheap price tag. Well, I see my rides are over here. So I think I have to take off.
Well, thank you for coming in. And we'll talk about you when you're gone now.
That's good. You can say anything you want.
So my name is Sean Burns.
Thank you, guys.
And I'm actually one of your.
General Counsel with Golden Valley. Corey Borgeson, President and CEO, would have been here. He's in Anchorage. First of all, Dave, I really want to thank you for this, putting this seminar on. It's unfortunate, we really should have had it before the Borough Assembly, because what you hear through this whole dialogue is it really is about vision. And it's a vision and a commitment to look not just at today, but beyond. Mark's community embraced it. Bob's co-op did it, but the bottom line is it's got to make economic sense. And so you have to look at the business models that make sense. And if the community is committed to it, and you put the property tax rate, there's a myriad of different options. It's got to happen though, because we as a community. And I think it's got to be at the community level. More think about it, more here. It's too big for a state to be able to come to a resolution, because it's the one size fits all. And I think Mark, that was your community when it came to that resolution, is that we just got to do it. And Dave's got enough that he's got to be dealing with at the state level. So, but at the borough, within this community, we've got to make those determinations. So it was fascinating to me, Mark, to hear, and Bob, both of you guys, that the level of commitment on the communication side. It took a long period of time to take the time to educate everyone to realize what's necessary and the benefits that flow from it, right? Because at Bob's co-op, I think you said the number for homeowner was about a little over $4,000. Here, let me tell you, for Golden Valley, we have there's I run the numbers, 2,650 miles of distribution lines. And the total cost, the cost per mile of putting fiber is about $56,000. Okay? And the total package is about $148 million. A lot to put on the backs of members. From the standpoint of the community, it's spread over, and there is no, at this juncture, there is no $18 of $21 million was either grant or long-term loan that's amortized over a very long period of time. And so it's trying to figure out how do you do it? And I love, Mark's slide where it's, the vision and the vision that was set by the community was we want to ensure education, we want to ensure connectivity, we want to ensure opportunity for growth in the future. And we know it's not just today. We can't pay for it. We can't pay for it next week. It's a long-term vision. And so that's really what I think this is all about. And I think, and I'm hopeful that I can assure you from Golden Valley's perspective, Golden Valley will help facilitate as much as we can. We made the opportunity and a little contribution from the standpoint of Miles to bring up in Bob and Mark brought it up, but it's going to take a community working together. I don't know whether the triple P works, the public-private partnership, but I think it's incumbent upon us to evaluate all the options. But what really is necessary is vision and commitment on a broad basis. Because you guys are here, but you're not getting, for the most part, you're not getting the connectivity that you would like. But much of Fairbanks, when we talk about much of Fairbanks, that the urban area is, and they're getting a tremendous amount. And I think there's going to be a lot of the typical, well, what we're not willing to pay for it, we don't need it just so that a few can. And so you're going to need to spend the time. I say not you, we as a community are going to have to spend the time to evaluate what really the need is, what the likely over long-term cost is going to be, and the benefits, and then make that decision collectively. And, I'm hopeful that we can take what's here and bring it, to the community level. But it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of diligence on the part of all of us to talk to our neighbors, to get it before the assembly, and to really encourage the voice. I can, Gary's one of the board members with Golden Valley. I'm, as I said, general counsel on the management side of it, and I can tell you, Golden Valley's, we strive to we are a co-op. We strive to the co-op principles, which is we work to improve the community. And how that ultimately translates into action remains to be seen, but it's not going to happen if it's just on the backs of a co-op, or if we sit back and rely on just private business, because their return on investment is very short. Okay? And this is not a solution that you can get a short payoff. This solution requires long-term investment. Anyway, any questions, General?
I understand different training session, but why is there a order from back to increase mile cost?
Well, in densities, in the areas of densities, we have.
I know, but regardless of fire density, putting mild fiber on the pole. We talked about.
I can just tell you that's what we have been getting for costs from probably one of the major contractors we do. So there's actual numbers on that.
Yeah, that's a good price.
And
They talked about per mile, it's like $4,000 or $5,000.
No,
20.
They're 20,000.
It was $4,000 or $5,000 per sub.
For sub, it was $4,500, $20,000
I see what
a
you're
mile.
saying. Multiply that by 4.3.
And we were all berries, and we were $20,000 per mile by the time all gets done, so. Well, berries.
That's the last one.
Most of us is aerial because obviously on the ground we
Plus expensive. Should be less, yeah.
It's, and that's part of being where we are. Yeah.
Any regulatory issues getting in the way for the valley to be able to do this?
Well, you've got several issues. You've got the regulatory done, you create the subsidiary, you've got the responsibilities and liabilities associated with that. Yeah, there's a lot of, there's some benefit, I mean, there's some things that can be done right now, on the state side, or whomever does it. Okay, from the standpoint of easements, rights of ways, because as, you know, we all know, all of us who are Alaskans understand, there's no money. All right, and so what's happening is that the agencies are, for Rolling Valley, if we cross through state agency lands, the fees that are just going through the roof. Okay, you know, even rural lands, you know, just all of those things. So we need to be able to figure out where we're at. Yeah.
My question is, you're not prevented
No. Okay. So let me turn it over to the rep, but,
So, thanks, John, and thanks for your service. I was Attorney General of the state at one point, so we're all with Golden Valley. But that is another thing that came up, and that I've talked with other the co-ops is the and you mentioned it briefly, is the easement issue, right? Although I think we're pretty good compared to other states, an easement might be for power, which means then you have to go get it for telecommunications. You know, they had to go get it for gas, you know, and I know in the gas issues, people were, they were trenching through easements, and people, there's no easement here, and there's no power line, but there's an easement, and it becomes an issue. And, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
In the state of Minnesota, the state law says that the state government and city government and county government cannot charge for use of rights. All of our rights are there free.
you remember the statute?
No. But it made a big difference in our business.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I know state agencies are charging to cross state land as a way of recouping costs. And I know there's a lot of issues like that on the table that are problematic, you know, because people had those easements and all of a sudden they're being charged for things they weren't charged for.
Exponential, too.
Yeah.
I mean, the rate just didn't go up incrementally, it went up exponentially. And, you know, I mean, the frustration, but the challenge is that the legislature has told many of these agencies that they have to be self-funded. It's self-sustaining, and so, you know, you certainly can't blame them for trying to pass those costs.
So,
it just becomes.
right. Yeah, and one of the big issues that that Mike talked about was the RCA, the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. Its language is basically in hard as copper wire telephone, right? They haven't caught up, and they've asked me to work on that, and I knew that in trying to get there, and you know, to come up with model legislation and stuff like that, and then when you start talking about giving them authority over broadband, all the providers come in, right? They're gone now, you know. I don't like talking about well of them when they're here, but because I don't want to give them the wrong impression. But they do some amazing things.
You know, why don't we turn it, you know, to the audience, and just, I mean, are there some ideas you have? I mean, how do you energize the community to embrace this solution, to come up with a solution, because it really is going to require, you know.
Wait a minute. Oh, okay, wait a minute. Look, Liam, you haven't said anything, so.
Don't you think also, though, that there needs to be, you listen to what Mark and Bob did, that the way you get that critical mass, and I totally agree with you, you gotta inform, you gotta educate, so people know what the options are, what they should, what they have every right to expect. If, you know, how do you do that? How do you get that ball moving to get that momentum?
It was the bully pulpit. I don't want to put anything on the industry. The bully pulpit of the mayor and the council, in our case, they stood up and said, we want you guys to learn about this. We think it's good. And that's kind of what started all of it.
We got Jeff Epps Step here from the mayor's office. Catherine Dodge was going to be here, but she got sick this morning, last night. But pressure on the Borough Assembly and members and the Golden Valley Board. Next general membership meeting is in the summer. Yeah, just, and tell your neighbors, right? When your neighbors say it's never gonna work, I mean, I just go back to this, which is one reason why I did this, because I had enough people saying, there's nothing we can do. We're just suffering through it. It's like that, no, that is not the right answer. And like Mark said, there is no time to say to stop or to not keep pushing. It's too important. And, so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, I don't think it needs, no, needs to be that way. We're all here and the able to believe it because so many of us know that we need to have that service. My download speed is 0.3 when I have it.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, you don't need to convince me. I think we're not, the general population isn't stupid. Members aren't stupid.
But there's a large sector that does really customize.
Yeah.
And so many are going to be asking to pay for hours when they don't need it. And so that's the education.
So that's why one provider was at the chamber on Tuesday, telling the chamber that everything was wonderful, that everybody has access to 1 gig. They're doing their job to diffuse and tamp down the message that everything isn't good, that there are considerable numbers of people. Now, some of these carriers are, if they could pick up more, I mean, there's a lot of customers out there somebody can pick up, right? They have a business plan and it does include most of us because they would have already done it. But that, from my perspective, that entire Chamber of Commerce meeting was to tamp down your need and your enthusiasm to move forward. The chamber, and it's one of my all-time frustrations with them, they don't look after their self-interest. It's someplace else. Economic development is the top of the list. And somebody asked me what the number was, and I said, it's probably in the low, just below 10,000 across the borough. New customers, people that have substandard broadband. There's 43,000 meters in the borough, right? Or Golden Valley has about 43,000. When you come across from Cripple Creek and down the Parks Highway, all the way around, all the hills all the way around now to Salter, where they have major problems as well. It's like there are people, can't figure out what's going on and why they don't have it, why they aren't part of America. But the provider was GCI, came up and everybody has it. What's the problem? Everybody has it. Or 70-80% of the borough on the road system has access for 1G. And those business owners are downtown. It's like, it's just not real.
We need to let the people who do have it know that in places like Minnesota where they did this, that the rates went down and others because
Yeah.
2G, I think, costs over $200 a month for GCI.
Jeff, I hate to put you on the spot, but really one of the commentators talked about we need to have an advocate. We need to have an advocate within the borough or that level who can speak to the benefits and really because you've got to educate everybody from a different perspective. Like you said, competition builds, generates better service, cheaper service. Also, let's set the vision for the community. The vision for the community on the executive Mark's said. And so that it requires a champion or champions at levels, at every level, but particularly at levels where they can be effective. You can get it before the assembly, create within the assembly that momentum to create a vision, and it moves from there. And we then, as
I tell you,
I see Burke shaking.
you want to do it every time there's an election, borough election, state election, just get in our faces and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, me, other people, you know, Ds and Rs and primaries and the general election and the guy running for governor, people running for governor. I mean, the governor's office really, yeah,
Party line.
right, has no party lines, right? Just get in all the fake, just, you know, so somebody in Anchorage running for state office, whoever it is, saying, oh, you going to Fairbanks? You better have a statement ready on broadband. You better know what you're doing if you go to Fairbanks on broadband, because they don't have it and they don't like it. And don't listen to the providers. You better listen to them. That's a big part of how we're gonna move forward. So, Mark.
We had one particular meeting, we had 10 city councils called to order in a large meeting, and another 50 people that are watching. We had about 115 people. And in the middle of the meeting, the rep from Central Maine stood up and said to me, when are you gonna quit lying to these people, Mark? You know this is gonna fail. You know their taxes are going up. I've known you for 10 years. I can't believe you stand there and lie to these people like that, Mark. And you just kind of takes your breath away. They will say what they need to say to stop or slow down what it is you want to do because they don't want the competition. And you can't blame them. But this is your community and these are your collective futures. And if you don't take ownership of it now, you lost it.
What else do you need? You need businesses, and other businesses, business leaders to embrace that concept because they're looking at not just the impact today on them, but how that helps feed the community in the years to come.
Well, yeah. For those that have it, the comment is, it's gonna drive your rates down. Right? It's gonna drive everybody's rates down.
And in pro service,
Yeah.
not just right rate down, your bandwidth is way up on both sides.
So it's 20 after we're in the middle of, I don't know how much time you have left on your presentation, but what would people like to do?